Well, firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to all of the panelists for attending Zoom call. We're really, really grateful to have you here and very, very thankful for all of your expertise and knowledge that you're just about to share. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for attending. I know it's really tough and I know everybody kind of does have better things to do, but nonetheless, you're going to gain a widespread amount of experience as well as knowledge on the finance sector and from some really, really incredible guests that we've got here. So firstly, Marco, can I see you, Marco? Hi, Marco.
Hey.
How are we, Marco? Firstly, you're going to be our first. We're probably going to ask you a few questions for. So first, I'd just like to ask how you are. How's UTS been so far?
Well, it's interesting times, as they say.
Interesting times.
Interesting times. But, you know, we survive. So things are good.
I'm glad. Well, I'm glad you've got a positive attitude towards it all. I've just got this is one of the first questions that we're just interested in asking. And that's really just to really tell us about yourself, what you studied at uni perhaps, and what really motivated you to pursue a career within academia and become, you know, the person you are today, being a professor.
Yeah. So it's getting a long story. So I did my undergraduate in Milan, in Italy, university called Bocconi, that is a reasonably prestigious university in Europe. I did finance, would be an equivalent of a business degree with a finance major here and honor, so it was a 4-year degree. In my last year, I did an internship in a consulting company. And then when I got at the end of my career, I was doing my military service because at the time we used to do military service in Italy. And I had some time to think, and I received 2 offers at the same time from the university, the offer of a PhD, and from the consulting company, the offer to stay in consulting. And I kind of flipped a coin. No, not really. I had a number of conversations with some friends, and I decided to stay in academia because I thought it was interesting. At the time, I could have, the thing that I always say to people, at the time could have gone both ways. Actually, I was wondering there was a third way that was investment banking, but by the time that I was graduating, I did a little bit of another internship in an investment company, so I was getting a bit burned out on investment banking. Those was the glorious 90s, so lots of money to be made, but the human tone of the investment banks in Europe was really, really tough. You know, there was this race to that 140 hours week, all these type of things, etc. So I had either consulting or academia. I decided to stay in academia. I thought it would be more flexible and with the possibility of then getting in the industry after the PhD. So I did my PhD, and after that, the academic system in Europe is a bit different from here. So I was recruited by the same university where I did my PhD. I worked there as an assistant professor for 7 years. And then I got an offer from UTS and moved to UTS. Basically, I was in the middle of a middle-age crisis and I said, okay, I'm going to go to Australia. So that's basically the idea. I needed a change of air. So the reason why I'm in academia, well, look, even in my consulting job, I had like a passion for research and quantitative research, numerical research, statistical research, whatever you want to call it. And even in the consulting company, I was usually put into projects where there was a lot of data work and research and, you know, estimation and stuff. So I really think that was where my passion was at the time. And so I said, okay, academia gives you a little bit of an opening to pursue this research interest. What I didn't know at the time was that in the end, you don't stay in academia because you like research, you stay in academia because you like teaching. And then you also like research, and that's important, but teaching becomes, in a sense, the most important part of your job. So if you don't like teaching, really academia doesn't do it for you. I think that's the best lesson that I learned in the last years, if you want.
Right, okay. Well, I mean, I guess it's quite difficult to kind of have both if you don't. Some people also can't really teach, I think. As like you have these incredible researchers, but they struggle to teach. So it's good that you can balance both, and you love teaching as well as researching, and having that passion for both would probably drive you to have the career that you have today. So I think that's great. In terms of the finance industry, how do you really think, I mean, given the current economic climate that we're living in at the moment with COVID-19, what do you see happening in the future, and how do you think COVID's really affected the finance industry or the consulting accounting industry as a whole? Do you think there could be any new emerging markets or a new growth sector that's about to be quite renowned?
Yeah, look,
research.
As an academic, I tend to be very cautious when I do predictions. You know, I'm specialized in doing predictions on the past, but when it comes to doing predictions on the future, I don't see COVID having super impactful. You know, if you look at medium term, if we go, beyond the bump. No, if you look at the financial industry, I don't see COVID in itself having a tremendous role, if not through creating opportunities via, for example, for consulting. I think that there is going to be a huge boom of consulting in terms of restructuring operations for a world after COVID. So in that sense, when it comes to consulting, I see that companies will going to restructure, there's going to be more mobility, etc. But when it comes to finance, I think the financial industry is in a singularity now because of the technology revolution. So that is really what's changing the industry. So if you ask me what's going to be the impact of COVID on the financial industry in 3 years, I wouldn't say not much, but the financial industry in 3 or 5 years will be very different just because of technology. Most of the traditional players are getting disrupted. All these new startups and financial startups are becoming more and more interesting to follow, and they are getting more and more tractions. I teach portfolio management, and the portfolio management industry is being completely disrupted by technology. So when I look at the impact of COVID, I don't see it as big as the impact of technology that was already going on. So that's my view.
So do you think there will be more of a boom within the technology sector? And if so, what technology? I mean, I do a technology degree. I'm studying IT as well. And for me, the growth of big data analytics, big data, as well as AI is quite significant and almost alarming in terms of what it can do and the potential it has to really control and dominate a lot of societal behaviors, as well as functionings of all businesses and even governments. So what software, what technology do you think is going to gain all of this traction and grow during this pandemic?
When it comes to investment, for sure, the trend now is algorithmic strategies with use of non-traditional data. That's where the innovation is. That's where all the action is now. I was reading the other day an article that says, okay, what do you need to go to work to Goldman Sachs? And Python literacy and Python skills are emerging at the top of the pile. That's why, for example, I'm currently working on restructuring my subject to introduce Python next semester. We were using MATLAB, but then it's been outclassed and you need to move to Python. So the idea is data skills and a little bit of computer programming skills. You will never be competitive with somebody who has a degree in engineering unless you put more time on your own, etc. But the fact that you know the lingo, that you know the languages, that you know where to learn, that you know how things work, in that sense, I think that's the most important when it comes to investment. When it comes to banking and other area of finance, well, there is the whole area of disruption through, let's say, startups. And there also, the main venue of disruption is algorithmic decision-making. So if you look at new lending platforms that are inching their way into the business of normal banks, where is the competitive advantage? We're basically using data to automate the job of a loan officer. Instead of having a traditional loan officer that, look at your pay stub, looks you in the face, does a bit of assessing, you pull the data. So who's going to design the algorithm that decides the credit scores? Who's going to, work on that? Yeah. So that type of stuff is where the innovation is, I think, at this stage. So that's why for people for students in business, they say, well, there is an interesting opportunity there, because one problem the companies have with your colleagues that come out of other faculties is that they may know the technology, but they have no clue about the business. So if you can come out knowing a little bit of both, that's a big leg up, seems to me.
Right, okay. In terms of AI, do you see AI specifically trying to disrupt, I mean, it already has to an extent, the finance industry as well? And do you think, let's say, the introduction of AI and big data, do you think that'll change, especially throughout this whole COVID period, do you think that'll change the finance industry and the way a lot of banks, investment banks, and other financial institutions, like, do you think it'll make a really big impact within the workspace, or?
Within the workspace, it's very difficult to say. It seems to me that when I look at investment, the percentage of portfolios that are being managed through some sort of algorithm that is fed through an AI algorithm or a machine learning algorithm is becoming higher and higher. So in that sense, they are going to conquer, if you want, if there is a market space for decision making, AI is conquering market share in that space. More and more decisions can be delegated to automatic systems. Now, the extent at that, in some areas of finance, there is a regulatory roadblock. There are maybe things that you could do with AI, but you're not allowed to do them by regulation. So you need some sort of human supervision. But for sure, when it comes to investment, for example, I think it's just going to grow. It's just going to grow. And even more and more traditional portfolio managers will develop in-house some sort of machine learning algorithm, or call them AI algorithm, just because it's more efficient. And they start working better and better, and the hardware is becoming cheaper and cheaper, etc. Okay.
All right. Thank you very, very much for your opinion. I mean, I do somewhat see that, and I think it is really important to, as well as have those skills. Doing a bit of Python myself, it's not for me, but for those interested within the engineering space, it's definitely a great language to learn, as well as C++, and HTML if you're interested in like web design. But yeah, they are very, very interesting spaces, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, especially given the current climate that we're living in. Now on to Ben Brownette. Where's Ben? Hi, Ben.
Hello.
How are you today?
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm glad. Now, Ben, given your role at CLSA being an equities analyst, and as well as having previous roles at investment banks and large domestic banks here, my main question to you is, what interested you to go into equities and really the finance industry?
Okay, so I did studied economics and finance at uni, undergrad and postgrad at Sydney Uni, and I was always interested in the stock market, and so I got an internship with a hedge fund. I did that for 6 months, liked it, and then decided to move into that industry. Like many other people, it's difficult to know how to get into those industries. I think we think about a bank, but there's a lot of roles in banks, and so equities research is part of the institutional equities department in an investment bank, and within that business you can choose either research, trading, or sales if you're interested in the stock market. And there's also within trading, there's many other sub professions in terms of derivatives and other things if you're that way inclined. And then if you're good at sales, it's a good role in sales. But the reason I liked equities research is that I do like those analytics, was good at maths, I like writing, and as part of it being an equities analyst, the requirement to write research is the key part of your job. But the other key part of your job is the numbers side and financial modeling. And then really a big part of it is still sales and creating relationships and talking to clients and talking to other people. So the reason I got into it was because I liked stocks and I liked the stock market, and like everyone else who follows Warren Buffett and reads Ben Graham books and the rest of it, I was one of them, and that's why I decided to get into equities.
What about Ray Dalio?
I don't read a lot of Ray Dalio, no.
Oh, you're not a fan of him? He's my favourite. I love how he went to Burning Man last year. Absolute character. Anyway, in terms of coronavirus, as we know, it's significantly affected everybody's lives. How has it changed your current position and the way you guys work, especially within CLSA?
Oh, well, a lot of people are working flexibly. Most of our clients are working flexibly, but all you need is a computer and a phone. So it's not so much how it's affected us, the way we work. It's more about what your role then needs to do in terms of understanding the impact of coronavirus on the various industries you look at.
Right.
And so the most obvious industry that's been impacted, say, would be travel, given you can't travel, or there's something, potentially less obvious like office, because people aren't going back into the office and there's a reluctance to go back, and people have embraced work from home and flexible working. That asset class has also been heavily negatively impacted. But there's also more broader issues on macroeconomic policy and low interest rates and negative interest rates and maybe low interest rates for a long time, that also has a significant impact on the way you go about your work and think about your work and returns. And there's obviously those industries that were impacted more heavily than others, and those industries that still are impacted, and then really just trying to work out what's short, medium or long term, and what some of those thematics might be, in trying to find mispriced stocks and different and interesting things to talk about. But really everything anyone looks at on the market now, their business has been impacted in some way, most of them negatively, but some positively. And for some businesses, they will come out stronger than when they went in. And for others, clearly their businesses are going to change.
Right. And where do you see, especially for equities, where do you see some of those emerging markets or opportunities to invest in now, given the coronavirus, the impact of coronavirus?
Oh, well, that's a little outside my mandate, but
if you can disclose some information, of course.
Well, no. Well, we, I look at a sector. So I look at industrial companies, and so that's anything from machinery manufacturing to explosives makers to people that mine, to people that do testing. I analyze a company which is actually involved in COVID testing, for example. So really what we sit here and do and try and work out is, well, what has genuinely seen demand destruction, and what companies have just seen deferral in demand. And so if you think about a coal mine versus a gold mine, obviously gold's hot, so anything I look at that has anything to do with gold is doing very well. And that activity is largely driven by price. So you kind of need to have a bit of a view on price, and many people have got many different views on something like that. But then when you look at something like coal, COVID has actually accelerated something like the thermal coal structural shift you're seeing in thermal coal, particularly in the US, where you're seeing more power stations powered by gas and you're seeing more renewables. And that thermal coal structural shift has been happening for a while, but COVID has accelerated it. So, there's certainly a preference that companies have away from that. It's probably also accelerated ESG. So anything you look at with coal right now, which is a lot of stuff I look at, has... there's probably, funnily enough, in equities, the way it works is there's always opportunities in things that have been negatively impacted, because your job's to work out whether things have overreacted or not. So, if you looked at the share price of a gold company, it would be on a 12-month high. If you look at the share price of a coal company, it would be on a 12-month low. So really what we're trying to do is work out where things are going to be in 12 months' time, and that's what the market does.
I don't know if you'd be able to give us a few tips or anything, or just let, of course, everybody listening know, is there any stocks that you would consider or suggest to invest in? I mean,
that's again also outside of the compliance of an investment bank. We don't have licenses to give stock advice to retail people, unfortunately. So
there's no, it's just in terms of, is there anything that we should look out for, any companies that we should look out for and keep an eye on, or in research ourselves?
I'm always interested in the video game companies. I think that's an interesting industry to go and do some work on.
Right, okay. Well, thank you for that little tip. Of course, knowing you can only give out so much. So, Devon, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Devon. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So, I would love to know a little bit more about you and how you've gotten to the role that you have at the moment. I know you're ex-UTS.
I am, yeah. So I've just completed my degree at UTS. So it was about a couple of years ago when I graduated. I did a Bachelor of Accounting. So it was a cooperative program. So in that it was a 3-year degree, very similar to just the normal Bachelor of Business that you guys would probably go through, or most of you would anyway. But we focused on a major in accounting. And then with that, we had a couple of internships within industry. So my first internship was at the Commonwealth Bank. So I was in wealth management over there. And then I went to Colonial First State, which at the time was with the Commonwealth Bank. So I was in their global asset management division for a little while. And then that obviously spun off, and you guys probably know about that in the news. They've turned into First Sentier Investors, which is now owned by Mitsubishi Bank in Japan. And then from there, I did my second internship at Dexus Property Group. So a couple of different things, but both within the asset management industry. And I think most of my interest, especially while I was at uni, was in investment. Like I was actually part of the Investment Society, the Business Society, all those different things as well. Right. And that's where those sort of interests stemmed for me. And then I took up a role just post that at PwC in financial services. So it's a little bit different to Ben, obviously, in investment banking in more of the research capacity. And then obviously with Marco being a professor, so purely academia, but mine's more in assurance. Right. We provide advice to different clients in that capacity. And I primarily work in the asset management space. So we're looking like your big corporates such as JP Morgan's, those investment banks, and then also Platinum Asset Management, Macquarie Asset Management, etc. So that's currently where I'm at. I've been in the role for a couple of years now, and really enjoying it. It's a great company. I like my work that I do there, and the culture of the company and the people that I work with. Okay.
Well, I'm glad that you like it. It seems like you've had quite a ad hoc kind of journey from going to PwC to CBA to Dexus and seeing a range of groups. In terms of coronavirus and how it's affected your life, what would you say has been some of the most challenging things that you've had to deal with, especially over the coming months with Corona, and how it's really affected your workplace as well as the industry?
So, I mean, in terms of my workplace at PwC, there hasn't been too much of a change besides the flexible environment that everyone's been talking about anyway, and you guys are probably across it as well, because it's obviously impacted university. So a lot of your lectures would probably be done virtually now, as opposed to when I was doing it, which was in a lecture theatre, and then you had your tutorials, etc. So that's been the biggest change, I think, for me personally, and especially I've come out of university and joined the organisation. So in terms of learning the ropes and just understanding what I'm doing, it was a bit of a challenge to move straight from that, what we were doing before, into a completely virtual environment and getting coaching through that. I think that's the main change, but I don't think it's detrimented our industry as such, because the technology has held up phenomenally. So, when we're providing consulting advice or assurance advice to a lot of these clients, we found that everything is held up, and we've been able to provide our engagements to, great quality. And that's what we obviously strive to do at organisations such as PwC. So I think the main challenge with coronavirus coming in is to just adapt to the way of which we all have to, which is the virtual aspect of things. In terms of the challenges for the industries that we're working for in asset management, obviously we saw a big change in the market dynamic in March, and that's affected a lot of the clients that I've been working for and providing advice to. So just it's interesting to see which industries have come out of that and sectors that have become a bit more resilient. And you know, healthcare technology is a big thing right now. Obviously, the afterpays of the world have been, you know, phenomenal. They've been gunning it recently. And then obviously Ben's also touched on some of the resources such as gold, copper, and all these things that have started to come up because investors believe that it's more of a safe haven to try and go into the resource sector. So that's been interesting to look at. I think in terms of coming out of COVID, it would be the technology sphere that would have the biggest impact. And we've seen through like the NASDAQ, it's been going so strong since March and that big drop. And then now obviously gold has touched its all-time high as well. And there's been different things in that sphere as well. So they're the main challenges and where I see it going forward with COVID.
Okay, wow. And in terms of where you see the future heading, is there any, of course, so we've touched upon that technology sector and everything. Do you see any other emerging markets or areas of growth?
Yeah, so I think with PwC, particularly, and a lot of the other big four and consulting firms, there's a big focus on providing that restructuring advice to a lot of these companies that have gone through the process. And I know Marco touched on that a little bit before, but you can see throughout the industry, a lot of these companies are poaching partners that specialize in those sort of spheres. So restructuring, like PwC is bolstering up its restructuring arm, it's bolstering up its deals arm because people will be looking at going into a few different M&As. Obviously not right now with the market conditions, but going forward, it would probably be in that situation. Private equity is also another big one where there's a lot of cash in that industry regardless. And with the restructuring that's going on, you can see a lot of those private equity giants basically coming in and trying to poach companies cheaply. And we saw that with Virgin just recently as well with the Bain acquisition. I think another thing that's got a big focus, especially within our firm and a lot of the other big fours, is the Treasury Function. So a lot of the banks and other clients are trying to focus on their balance sheet and how to revitalize that and focus on how they can utilize their cash going forward and maybe manipulate different aspects of their balance sheet to, make them more resilient to the environment that we're currently in. And there's a greater focus and push, especially from APRA being the prudential regulator. It's big focus on banks, how they're going to be regulated going forward and how they can utilize their cash and have cash requirements that will help them going forward to come out of this.
Okay, great. Very fascinating. Firstly, I'd like to say Josh as well has prepared a few other questions for the panelists. If Josh would like to come on.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Okay, great. No problem.
So I had one for each of our speakers. It's the same question. And if we could start off with Marco, I'd like you to speak to the importance of networking. And even in academia, I'm sure you have to network. What have you found? What are the do's and the don'ts of networking?
Well, I mean, the importance of networking, I guess everybody will speak to the importance, no? And you yourself, you were speaking to it. So, of course, let me give you a couple of examples. For academia, networking happens in two main places. Happens during conferences and happens during seminars, okay? So in UTS, we used to have to invite every week a seminar speaker from overseas that would come to UTS and spend a day with us, give a seminar, and then talk one-to-one with people. Every good university tries to do the same thing. Okay, it's very expensive because we're in Australia, but it's how you develop your collaborations with possible co-authors. Now, when it comes to personal experience, I'm in Australia because in a conference, I met a guy who happened also to be Italian. And so as it usually happens, we tend to congregate because we like the accent. And so I spoke to this guy, and he was working in a weird university in Australia that I never heard, called UTS. And so I met this guy. We were doing research on the same topic. We started working together. The following year, I came to UTS for a month. And then the following year, the year following that, I got a call from the head of department at UTS, say, hey, look, we have an open position. Would you be interested coming down under? So it all happened because I met this random guy who had a weird accent at a conference. Yeah. Same thing, but even before that, some of my best publications, I worked on them where I was teaching at the University of Texas at Austin. I was teaching there for a year. Mm-hmm. And I went there because at a conference, I met the head of department. And that is a very nice woman called Laura Starks, that is one of the leading authority in the field where I was doing research at the time, that was investment funds. And I met her. I was a bit starstruck because she wrote some of the most important papers, but she also happens to be a very interesting person. So I went, I introduced myself. I asked her if she was available to read a thing that I was writing. She said yes. And after 6 months, she invited me to go to Austin for a semester to teach there and do some research, etc. So in academia, really a lot of opportunity of writing with people, and maybe even traveling for a semester or for a year to university happen because of personal contacts. Yeah. And that's why every university invests a lot in networking, because it's a lot of money. So that's the reason why in this moment, every academic is depressed. It's not only because there is a probability greater than 0 that you lose your job, but also because we can travel. Yeah. And so we do the seminar. So we have like 2 or 3 seminars on Zoom every week. They are usually in the morning because most of our speakers come from the US. It's not really the same thing, but we try to replicate as much as we can. Exactly, because you need to see new ideas, but then you need to talk to the guy and say, hey, look, have you thought about extending your work in that direction, etc. So that's absolutely crucial. And when people don't travel, don't go to conferences, don't go to seminars, they just keep redoing the same thing. That for an academic is like intellectual death, but also very bad for your career, because after a while, there are only so many papers that you can write that are all the same. Okay, so for us, it's really crucial, and it happens specifically at conferences and seminars.
Okay, yeah, so there are definitely some parallels between academia and the corporate sort of life. We can see that. Thank you, Marco. Appreciate that answer. Ben, would you be able to speak to the importance of networking and the do's and don'ts?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I mean, building relationships, no matter what you're doing in work, is probably the single most important thing, and something you don't necessarily learn in a lecture. A lot of them are life lessons. I did a lot of events when I was at Deutsche with grad events and whatever, and those things are probably the bare minimum things you need to go to. I'd probably suggest you didn't just randomly spam people with emails or LinkedIn messages and those types of things. It's really like any relationship. The best relationships you have are the relationships where you have some commonality with that person. Yep. Whether you share some of the same interests, or like Marco was saying, if from the same place or whatever, they're the types of things that you need to form any relationship. So you certainly need to put yourself in the right position to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I'm always willing to help people out when they ask is that a lot of people have helped me out, and a lot of people do continue to help me out, whether it's an industry expert. I'm taking an industry expert, a thermal coal expert to lunch on Friday with a couple of clients. So, there's a free lunch in it for him, but more importantly, it's really about the best relationships I have with these types of people are really around what can I offer them. So I really think if you're going to try and build a relationship with someone to further your career, that's absolutely fine. That's what every single person does. That's what every single person that's ever in a senior position has relied on their network to help them in some way, shape or form. So, the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know, that is kind of true, but you should view that in the right context, that yes, someone can help you out, but how can you help them out? And I think if you're always remembering, how can I help this other person out and how can we be mutually beneficial, you will always have a better relationship. And in terms of how to do those things, obviously when you're at university, that's challenging, but I think it's about talking to as many people as you can and talking about genuine interests with people, because when someone's disingenuous, it's very obvious. So make sure that when you do speak to someone and you want advice or you want a coffee, and I think by and large, most people are happy to spend some of their time helping other people for the reasons I explained before, that most people themselves use the same methods for them to learn, whether it's professionally or personally. So don't be afraid to go and ask someone for some help. But when you do, make sure you're well read, make sure you know a lot about the person that you're going to speak with, and above all, always make sure you're not wasting someone's time.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. Make sure it's mutually beneficial. I think a lot of people forget that. Thank you, Ben. Devin, could you please speak to the importance of networking and a bit more on the question, how did you sort of leverage your internships into your role at PwC?
Yeah, great question. I think I basically listening to what Ben said and what Marco said just before, I think a lot of those points are very valid. And the most important thing that I recall from when I was doing a lot of networking, especially in university and going to all these events, etc., was to be genuine and actually show a real interest in what people are talking about. And if you're not interested, then maybe don't talk to that person or try different avenues. But I think it's keeping those genuine relationships and actually maybe making it so the conversation flows a bit more normally, even if it means having someone else come with you and be, some would say like a wingman or something, so you can bounce off each other, have that conversation. And it just makes it flow a little bit better. And then you can obviously bounce off, ask more questions, get a deeper understanding, and then get the information that you require. And also it links to that point where you should be also able to help someone else. It's not always one relationship or in one way. It has to be the reciprocal as well.
Yeah, something to add to that is if you're not being genuine, it's going to come through at some point during the meeting. So
100%. Exactly right, Josh.
It's going to help you out and them out if you actually want to talk to them. Yeah,
that's right. So I think going into that conversation, just introducing yourself is obviously the first point of call, right? And going in, just say, look, I'm really interested into what you're doing. Would you mind giving me a little bit of information? And then the conversation will flow from there. You ask more questions. They'll ask questions about you, what your hobbies are, what your interests are, and it will turn more into a conversation than just a formal interview. And no one wants a formal interview. You can't go into these conversations basically trying to interrogate a person because it's disingenuous then. So I think, going into it as a friendly conversation, trying to build the rapport, build the relationship is the best way to go about it. Having that genuine interest. And one thing that I really liked is I had a good friend in university, and every time we had these networking events, we would go together and we would talk to that person together. He would ask a question, I would ask a question, and we'd talk about that. And it would just turn into a friendly conversation. And it probably often ended up in, us having beers or catching up for a coffee with that person at a later stage. So again, another thing just on the back of that is to try and follow up. So if you are genuinely interested with the particular person that you're talking about and you want to know a bit more, maybe send them a message or say, oh, can I have your business card? These are my details. Share that and then follow up and say, oh, it'd be good to catch up for a coffee, or if it was a deeper conversation, maybe for a beer on a Friday evening, right? And Ryan's bar is always open, so it's pretty good that way. But yeah, I think that they're the main points that I'd share with networking.
Yeah, lovely. And just to the second part of that question, mate, how how did you leverage those networking tips into your grad role?
Yeah, so a lot of so as part of the Bachelor of Accounting program that I was talking to you guys about before, we had internships that were sorted out for us in a way where we went into industry, and because we were selected for the program, they put us into these positions where we went to CBA or to Dexus, wherever. From there, we obviously met a lot of different people, and we had these events often where our sponsor organizations would come in, and we get to talk to them and share our interests with them and get that rapport going. So at the end of it, they obviously knew who we were and we knew who they were. So we can, leverage that process into the interview capacity. And once someone knows you, it goes back to the point where it's who you know, not what you know. Mm-hmm. And then you can make that relationship develop and probably try and leverage it into a role. And that's how it was fortunate enough for me to get my grad role at PwC.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks for that, mate.
No worries.
Ben, just one last question to you before we move into the Q&A section. I would love to ask what your opinion on the best way to break into the industry if you're a student that you can't really land an internship or a grad role. You're just on mute.
Sorry, you think I'd be an expert in Zoom by now?
No worries.
Look, it's not easy to get a grad role or an intern role at a bank, and the reason for that is the screening process run by HR is pretty rigid. And I think if you think about it, if they're offering 5 jobs and 5,000 people are applying, they're probably going to start with the people with the best marks and go down from there. Now, did I have the best marks at uni? No, there was way too much partying and way too much playing rugby and way too much socializing. But those things also give you skills that maybe an HD average doesn't. So I wasn't in the boat where I was going to get one of those internships or graduateships either. So is that the be all and the end all? No, it's not. And most people I work with the exception of a couple, have found their way into this industry after something they did. Mm-hmm. And so for me personally, after I finished my first degree, I went and worked in accounting. And there was no real reason for doing that. It just seemed like something interesting to do at the time and learn about accounting, which I hadn't really done at uni. And then I went back and I did a couple of master's degrees. And then after doing all that and doing some work experience and some free work experience, then I was able to break into my industry. I think in equities research specifically, most people that I've worked with, and every investment bank in Australia is someone I've worked with or know, and really very few of them have gone through that graduateship program because there's a lot of other skills you need. Yes, you need to be analytical and good with numbers and modeling, but it's a lot more personal skills come into it, a lot more relationships.
Yep.
So, my only suggestion would be is to go and do every extracurricular thing you can do, whether, if you want to get into equities, it's a stock picking competition or run your own portfolio. It doesn't have to be real money, and do some of your own analysis and do those things so that when you are in a position where you're talking to someone, that they're impressed by you and that should there be an opportunity, you're front of mind. But yep. I think it's just about one being yourself and showing people what you're really interested in, and wherever you start, you're not going to end there. And most people I know have I've worked at 1, 2, 3. This is the 4th investment bank that I work for. I've worked for Australian, American, German, and Chinese investment banks. And most people I know have worked in a lot of different banks and a lot of different industries. So wherever you start, it's a start. Just make sure that you're learning something when you're doing that.
That's a very good point. And just to follow up on that quickly, you said you did a couple of master's degrees. What did you find the best one was in order to say upskill? Say if you didn't have the best grades in uni, how did you find that helped you sort of be a better candidate for those roles that you missed out on during your undergrad?
So I did a Bachelor of Economics first with a double major in microeconomics because that's something that I liked. And then after that, I went and did a Master of Commerce in Finance. So then went back and did accounting and finance. And then I did a Master of International Business, which was a bit more softer skills.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, I only did that. I think when you do uni the first time in undergrad, you do it because that's just what everyone else was doing at the time.
Yeah.
And I think the tendency for a lot of people, especially me, was it's probably not your primary focus.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you decide that you want to do something for yourself and learn something for yourself, then you do tend to put a lot more effort into it. Definitely. And so that was really the key reasons that I went back and did it. And look, I was fortunate enough that one of my friend's dads happened to run corporate finance at Goldman's, and he gave me some life advice, and he sort of said to me, look, go back and learn accounting and finance, and then when you're done, come back and talk to me. So, you know, someone wants to give you some advice and they're successful, it probably makes sense to go and do it.
Definitely. It's a great relationship to have. Lovely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. All right, guys. So that concludes our first section. So we're going to move over to the Q&A section. We'll run this until 6:30. So just quickly, if anyone had any questions, we'll give it about 30 seconds to submit a question. And if you can direct it to a speaker, that would be great. And if you'd like to present it yourself, just write, I'd like to present it myself. And if you want to ask them a question, we can unmute you. But yeah, chuck that in the chat box to the right, and we'll just give you 30 seconds. Otherwise, we'll ask some more questions that we've prepared. All right, I'll go ahead and ask the first question. Marco, this one's for you. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind elaborating on how does the academic research and teachings differ between the US, Europe, and what you found in Australia?
At the end, when it comes to research, really not much.
Yeah.
It's a very globalized job market. We all try to publish in the same 5 journals, because are the ones that the Financial Times uses to rank MBAs. Mm-hmm. So at the end, the market is heavily globalized, and there is very little difference in terms of how you do research, etc. When it comes to university life in general, there is much more difference according to the type of university. So in the US, there is a 2-tier system. There are universities that are research universities, usually are the most prestigious one, the rich ones, the ones that you know the names, etc. Mm-hmm. Where your job is primarily research, and you get assessed and evaluated primarily on your research. And then there is a second tier of university where your job is primarily teaching. These are called teaching universities or teaching institutions. You may still do some research, but your primary focus is teaching. So there is a 2-tier system. When it comes to Australia, instead, is more uniform. Almost every university in Australia has, for the vast majority, a balanced type of approach to the workload. So you are assessed and your workload involves both research and teaching, except very few people at very few universities. Very likely Melbourne and maybe UNSW have some faculty members that mainly do research in business, but very, very few. Most of the people have a balanced approach where your time is divided between research and teaching. So that's the biggest difference, is that in the US, immediately when you finish your PhD, if your PhD is good enough, if your profile is good enough, you try to get into a into a research university. In Australia, is more uniform in this sense. Wherever you go, you're going to do your teaching, you're going to do your research. Mm-hmm. There are universities that give a little bit more importance to one and the other, but not too much. Yeah. So that's the biggest difference.
Okay. And just on top of that, when you come out as an undergraduate student, in your opinion, are you all at the same level amongst those 3 countries?
Undergraduate? I don't know. I mean, undergraduate is very difficult. I used to think the university in Europe are more difficult when it comes to undergraduate, but maybe just because I was there 10 years ago, so things have changed. It seems to me that we're a little bit more rigorous than American universities. American universities are not famous for their undergraduate. Yeah. They are most famous for the postgraduate education. Definitely. So, but I really wouldn't have a firm answer on that.
Okay. No, thank you for the attempt. Beautiful. So we have a question from William. William, which speaker was this directed to?
Just anyone generally, thanks.
Okay, perfect. So he asks, what are the main areas or departments that you can work in with an investment bank? So, Marco, do you want to start that off? I know you teach the subject.
Well, traditionally, there are two main areas in an investment bank. At least my understanding when I was in Europe, when I was back and looking at the job positions in London, there was the big divide between markets and investment banking proper. So on the one side, you can do advisory work, where you work on advising company on M&As, IPOs, leverage buyouts, all this type of, that is more the corporate financing type of side of the business. There is a lot of financial modeling, there is a lot of structuring of operations, etc. Then there is the market side, where you can end up either in research, so doing investment research, usually sell-side research inside the investment bank, but other speakers can speak better on this. You can end up doing a sales role, where you basically manage institutional investors and try to suggest possible investment opportunities, or you can become a trader and do the actual trading. Most large investment banks now, even in Australia, you look at Macquarie, they have such a large portfolio of stuff that there is a lot of roles, even in roles that we would consider traditional banking, like lending, structuring loans, etc. But when you look at traditional investment banking, it's either advisory or it's market, and that is the big divide that you need to decide where do you go. At least that's the way I see it. Yep. But maybe other speakers have better ideas on this.
Thank you. Ben, did you have anything to add on that question?
Yep. No, so as Marco pointed out, that's right. I mean, there's, out of all I mean, CLSA is owned by CITIC. CITIC's the biggest investment bank in China. Deutsche is obviously a big investment bank. 90% of the people that work at those banks, I have absolutely no clue what they do. So when someone says they work in investment banking, I think people, me who works there, an investment banker is more on the advisory side or on the private side of the Chinese wall. And on the market side is where I sit, is generally on the public side of the Chinese wall. So your clients are institutions, but within that market side of the bank, there's, FX, commodities, equities, fixed income. There's many different sub-segments of assets. And within all of those segments, there are many different roles, particularly in generally research, sales, and trading. And really what you find is that the real propeller head, smart math kind of guys, a lot of them work in trading, but there's a lot of trading roles that are a little bit more vanilla. There's not a lot of proprietary trading that goes on in banks anymore. And most of the trading is a little more transactional in terms of just execution and back office type things. And in terms of sales, I've worked with some of the best sales guys on the street, and they wouldn't have a clue what anything was in an economics textbook or how to solve Forex. And it's purely relationships. And then in research, you need a bit of everything. So when you're working, if you think about investment banking, it can cater for many different types of characters and many different types of skills. So I wouldn't get stuck in thinking that I want to be an investment banker or watch a movie and think, if you think about that new Wall Street movie, that guy cuts across every single different side of the Chinese wall, which is obviously you can't do in a bank. So I don't think the stereotype of someone that works in an investment bank is probably correct. And really the only way you can work that out is by speaking to people. But I would say that the people I've worked with has been a very diverse group of people and a very diverse type of people from an educational basis. Most people have some kind of businessy degree, but there's, I work with people that have PhDs in metallurgy and engineering, and there's finance guys. And I think now if you're trying to get a job, you need a university degree, but once upon a time you didn't. So look, there are many, many different roles that you can have within an investment bank. You know, if you just think about the divide between research, sales and trading, they cater for many different types of characters.
Definitely. It's great perspective. Thank you, Ben. So Mark's asked this one. It's for you again, Ben. What are some common misconceptions about working in finance that most people don't know until they start working in the industry?
Misconceptions. I don't know what any misconceptions is, but it's not a misconception that you're going to have to go there as in your first 5 years and work 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's not a misconception. Most banks, I'm not sure how COVID will change this, but most banks, a lot of it is about face time, unfortunately. I'm not a believer myself in that, but most people are. So everyone in any job, if you want to get ahead, you need to work harder than the next guy, and the next guy is always willing to work hard. So it is a very dog-eat-dog world working at a bank. But again, all of those things are changing a lot in terms of just the way people act and behave at banks. It's not as unfriendly, I think, as people probably imagine. But I'm not sure what the misconceptions are. But if there's a concept that you have to work 12 hours a day, that's probably not a misconception.
Yeah. Thanks for clearing that up. Mark, did you want to elaborate on a misconception or just general ones? Okay. Yep, just general ones. All sorted. So for Devin, this one's for you. What advice do you have for building up your CV for the internships or grad roles you apply for, and what do you think's looked upon favourably?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think when I was building up my CV, especially coming out of high school, and there's not much experience that you've had, and I know the catch-22 is a lot of these companies look for experience when they're trying to hire for internships and graduate positions. But I think one thing that you guys already have beyond a couple of other people is joining these societies and networking with individuals that are already in industry. So having this sort of information on your CV would probably be quite helpful. So if it's the business society, it's the investment society, and the stuff that you guys do around that, especially if it's just getting involved. I know some of you are probably on the exec teams for a lot of these societies, so that sort of stuff is quite good. I think in high school, a lot of the stuff that I did that may have set my CV apart a little bit more was around community service. So there was a big exposure to that sort of stuff when I was in year 11 and 12, and having that in my CV and talking about that a little bit more maybe aided it. Ben did talk about this before, having that sporting engagement, as I said before, volunteering, all that sort of stuff. It builds a persona that's different to someone else that just purely focuses on getting that HD. And it's good for these companies because they do look for people that would be able to maybe talk to other people, build those relationships and have that meaningful conversation. And that doesn't always mean you have to get an HD. So if it is something that you're interested in playing rugby or pursuing that, maybe you're a captain, maybe you're the loudest person on the pitch, that teaches you something, that speaks to your character, which is something that can build and you can talk to within a CV and build a bit more on that. As I said, so those societies, any little bits of experience that you've had, maybe if it's working for your dad's business, doing the accounting, doing the books for that, or even working for your friend's, law firm or something, which I did as just an EA. So I'd helping do draft up legal documents, minor paralegal work and things like that, just to bolster up that CV. And then obviously you put down your education, the different things that you've done coming out of high school. It would probably be ATA, how well you did there, the subjects that you've done and how those subjects have made you, obviously be the person that you are. But I think the key around my CV might have been my extracurricular involvement.
Beautiful answer. I think another thing that also helped you out was definitely being a part of the Bachelor of Accounting and having that experience in your CV from day one at uni.
Correct.
One other question has been asked. So Sid has asked this one for you, Ben. How do you think your accounting background helped you with your career in investment banking?
Yep. So I only did 2 accounting subjects, and that was to allow me to do finance. So at Sydney Uni, you had to do accounting 100, 101, 002. So you need accounting to understand financial statements. And I think in a lot of the work that I do, you need to be an expert on an industry and these types of things. But I think if you asked a client, they would say that my financial statement analysis and understanding of accounts is very good. I think I've just learned that through practice, really, and also looking at companies that have been subsequently found out to be corporate frauds and going back and seeing some of those accounting tricks. So I think it's really important to understand accounting and the different types of accounting and accounting standards, and particularly revenue recognition, which changes a lot, and to understand that a P&L is really subjective, and the differences in terms of what cash flow is and a P&L, and understand a balance sheet and those types of things. So I think I've just learnt that over time, but I think certainly you can't go wrong for a job in finance if you know accounting. It's just one of those things you don't want to get too far into your career and just be an accountant. If you're only good with numbers, then that would be a good job for you. But if you're a good speaker and you like relationships and things, it was important to me, not really from a university point of view, but to learn after. So if I had my time again, I probably would have done a few more accounting subjects, but I definitely found there was a subject in my master's, financial statement analysis, and that was a really good subject for me. And looking back on that, analyzing financial statements is something I spend a lot of time on, especially that it's key to the job twice a year when companies hand down their results, that you got to try and read a 150-page annual report and then 10 minutes later try and get back to a client to see that if you found anything funny in there. And of course, if you look back at something like Enron or Babcock and Brown or Carillion Construction Company in the UK, it's important to understand that all companies are audited, and there's often frauds, and every company that's committed major fraud has also been audited. So accounting is subjective, and it's a really good skill to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think accounting sort of forms the basis for anything to do with finance. So it's a good skill to have. Whether you pursue that as a degree, that's your choice. Thank you for that question.
No worries.
I have a question here regarding automation, and it's I guess you can take the reins on this one first, Marco, and then we'll move over to Ben. How safe do you think sort of equity research is from?
So very few things are safe from automation. So that's a short answer.
Yeah.
We all like to think that our work is safe, and that we are not in the group of people that can be automated. I mean, reality is, I'm pretty sure that somewhere somebody has already built a couple of algorithms that can troll to a lot of, all the financial statements, etc., and come up with a rating for a company. That's not too difficult. But that's why, and here, the other speakers can complete better. But the role of the analyst is not only to assess the company. And I mean, it's true that analysts can try to add value for the clients in other ways. For example, many brokers in the US try to create a point of connection, become point of connection between institutional investors and the firms that they cover. okay? So it's not just producing the analyst report. The analyst report is just part of your job. Now, again, nothing is safe from automation. If you read that analyst report, it's true that there are a lot of analysts that don't add a lot of value, but that's why the profession has been in flux for a number of years. The fact that in Europe, when they've introduced the new regulations that force analysts to charge a price for the coverage, and the cost of the coverage cannot be bundled with transaction fees, a lot of demand went away for specific analysts because, okay, this analyst doesn't create enough value. So for sure, if you are in the middle of the pack, automation is a serious problem. Very good analysts try to add value by either trying to develop really private information through interactions with the management to the extent that is allowed under the law. And also their business is not only producing reports, is also doing other stuff for institutional clients. So, but other speakers can speak better to this.
Definitely, yeah. And thank you for that, Marco. And Ben, any thoughts on automation and potentially taking your job?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of people's jobs, or automation. But exactly what Marco said, I think one of the key skills that I have, and the one key thing that clients pay me for, is something that they can't get themselves, and it's more around having private sector contacts. So twice a year, I'll take clients to Perth, and we will go and see 30 companies. And 20 of those 30 companies are privately owned companies that over years I've developed relationships with. And I'm the only person that can get those meetings. And the reason I'm the only person that can get those meetings is that I've developed a relationship with a person and I'm adding them value. So some of these CEOs are on my distribution lists. Some of these guys call me regularly for feedback about what's going on, and you create that loop. So there's no doubt that our industry is structurally challenged. We see that every day in the numbers, and there's more and more quant funds popping up where you simply don't talk to. You do provide your numbers into consensus, which is an important driver of a quant fund. But I think, as Marco said before, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in at. You've always got to strive to be in the top quartile. And you can never be mediocre, because if you're mediocre, you're never going to be successful. But one of the things Marco was talking about unbundling, that actually hasn't hurt me and my brand specifically. It's only made it better because I was delivering, and I've always seeked to deliver something that other people can't. I mean, in any business, you've always got to be trying to do something that other people can't, or you've got to be doing something differently. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to be valuable to someone. But there's absolutely no doubt that technology and automation is playing a major role in every industry, particularly banking and particularly equities research. But it's about finding those spots where relationships are actually more important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's a scary thought, but I think, as you said, if you're in that top quartile and you're always trying to be the best, well, it's going to be hard to top that. So I have another question for Marco and then Ben. Could you speak to the rise of quant trading and what that job entails, and the skills or degrees needed to break into that profession?
Yeah, so quant trading is a wide name. You can consider it as a there is a lot of wide aspect of activities there. So in terms of skills, so there are two sides. There is the engineering sides. A lot of quant trading requires very high level of computer programming and infrastructure construction, etc. So that's a job that usually goes to people coming from engineering. So the normal quant trading outfit will have, on the one side, engineers that build the infrastructure and actually prepare the software. And on the other side, you have people that develop the strategy. And people that develop the strategy are usually come from the finance side, but have a quantitative skill set. So for example, people that, yes, know what is stock, know what is a financial statement, etc., but they also have, experience in, asset pricing and running regressions to find out which factor affect these other factors. So there is an aspect. So that's why usually there are either PhDs, so most of quant outfit tend to hire a lot of PhDs, or at least people with masters that have a little bit more training in quantitative methods than normal students. But for sure, there is an expertise from the engineering side, and there is an expertise from the financial side. That's why we're trying to inject a lot of numeracy now and quant skills a little bit in the undergraduate so that people can more or less get their bearings.
Yeah.
But usually serious quant outfit at the financial side comes either with people with PhDs or at least master degrees, exactly because you need a certain quant background just in terms of econometric statistics, etc., that is difficult to get in an undergrad. So that's my spiel on that.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And Ben, anything more to add on that?
No, not really. I mean, it is, yeah, I think you need to be obviously extremely bright, that engineering background. We have a few quant clients that we sort of not speak on the phone to, but provide data to. It's not really something that I'm that exposed to really. So I think what Marco said is probably on the money.
Okay, yeah, lovely. All righty. Well, if anyone has any more questions, let's chuck them in now. Otherwise, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and our lovely panelists have. Okay, no, I'm interrupted. Here we go. So for Marco, or really any of the panel, what are your thoughts of pursuing a CFA? And do you think it would make a difference in making a person with an undergrad degree stand out? If you want to take that first, Marco. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not super expert. We have a CFA person in our department that coordinates a relationship with them. It seems to me that at least in the US, they are still very important as an association, as basically as a quality certifier of the skills and of candidates for the position of financial analyst. There has always been a little bit of discussion because there are certain topics that they don't want to cover, like a lot of stuff in investment banking is not covered there. But yeah, for sure, it's one of these things. It's very rigorous. It's very costly to go through the process, and it's also internationally very competitive. So for sure, gives you a certification effect. If you ask me what percentage of people working in finance in Sydney have the CFA, honestly, I don't know. Yeah. But at least in the US context and in London, that is where you go to work from Europe when you make it big in finance, CFA was kind of a requirement. But okay. I have no idea in Australia if it's how prevalent it is in the industry.
Okay, yeah, great thoughts. Yeah, I spent some time in my internship with a man from London who had a CFA, and apparently over there it's it is a requirement to go into sort of asset management side of things. Ben, did you have anything to add on the CFA side? Have you run into any people with the CFA that you thought were better off than other people?
Look, I haven't done it, but I've got 2 postgraduate degrees and an undergraduate degree, all in business and finance. So I didn't think I really needed it.
Yep.
But my associate who works with me, he's currently doing it. I think in the US, it's very important. In Europe, it's important. It's not as important here, but it's just, again, how badly do you want a job? Like I think what it does show is that you are willing to commit to something like that. It is very, very time consuming. The exams are tough. The pass rates aren't that high. Personally, I don't think rote learning does a lot for you. But what it does show an employer, you're going to stand out. If someone else has it and you're exactly the same candidate and you don't, you're probably going to lose out. So early in your career, there's absolutely no downside in doing it. Obviously, you want your employer to pay for it, but pretty much any employer would pay for it. So certainly that's something I'd look at doing in my first role that I got.
Okay, yeah. yeah, I think it sort of differentiates you at the start, but once you get that professional experience, that speaks louder than certification in some aspects. So I've got another question here, just the last two questions, guys. So we've got one from Tristram. How do you navigate entering the finance industry when you're not sure about what you specifically want to do? So Devin, do you want to take that one at the start? You're on mute, mate.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that. I was just on the phone with someone. Do you mind repeating the question for me?
No worries. How do you navigate entering the finance industry when you're not sure about what you specifically want to do?
I think for me, I wasn't actually particularly sure on what I wanted to do. And I did an accounting degree, and I found that quite useful because, again, accounting is the fundamental base of everything in the finance business industry, just in corporate in general. And we've probably heard from all the other speakers as well, that is the base, and you utilize that for whatever role you tend to go to, whether it be in investment banking, whether it be in consulting or anything like that. Mm-hmm. In terms of going into the finance industry, I would definitely say while you're at university, definitely try and find out what your passion is and what you want to do going forward. So if you don't know, then it would be having those conversations with different people within the industry and trying to work out what you exactly want out of it, and then applying for the roles that you are very familiar with or really want to do going forward. You don't want to waste time in your future, and you don't want to go cross and try different things because you're just not going to end up anyway. So if you do find that passion, go for it and apply for roles in that environment.
Yeah, great answer. Did Marco and Brent, did you want to touch on that question quickly?
I personally don't have much to add in the sense, sorry, Ben, in the sense that I always knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But look, your first job is less and less. There used to be a lot of time dependency. So your first job used to determine your career all along. Nowadays, there is much more flexibility. And even in banks, sometimes you get on the one side and then you get to know people on the other side, and you can try to do a lateral move. So I wouldn't worry too much in that sense. There is much less path dependency than just 20 years ago when your first job was basically putting you on a track. But that's my feeling.
Okay, yep. And Ben?
Yeah, look, I was going to say it's very, very difficult to know what you want to do, because anyone that's at uni has no idea what people do on a day-to-day basis when they work into the office. And as I said, I couldn't tell you what half the people did on my floor on a day-to-day basis. I think I kind of know, but I don't. But it's very, very difficult to be getting a front office role in a bank coming out of uni. And I've seen a lot of people be really successful, say somewhere like Perpetual, which is a great brand name fund manager, one of my biggest clients. There's a lot of people that started in back office in somewhere like Perpetual. Maybe it was in accounts, maybe it was as an assistant, maybe it was just doing any kind of job. And once you're there, that's when you start working on your relationships, and you can move into something like funds management, or whether you want to be in business development or whatever. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing a more back office job that you have a vision in 2 or 3 years to move to something else and have that career progression. So I wouldn't be disheartened by the fact that you're applying for junior trader roles and not getting them. There's simply nothing wrong with working in the back office of a bank and showing people that you have the right aptitude and the right motivation to succeed and do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Okay. That's a great answer from all three of you. Unfortunately, guys, that's going to be the end of our Q&A section. I'd like it if you could all sort of give thanks to our three lovely panelists for answering all your questions.
Thank you.
Marco.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.